Hello everybody and welcome to today's episode of the Royal Blue Podcast. I'm your host Conor O'Neill, joined by the Echo's Everton correspondent Joe Thomas as we look ahead to Saturday's Premier League clash away to Manchester City. But Joe, before we get into talking all things Manchester City and a return to Premier League action for the Blues, I think we'll start with Kevin Thelwell's open letter perhaps, or update that has been published on Friday morning by the club. It was another, I think it's safe to say, good piece of communication from one of Everton's senior members of the hierarchy, an update on where things currently lie on the football side of things, obviously a review of the January transfer window, even though very little happened. But what were your main takeaways from what Kevin Thelwell has told supporters this morning?
Yeah, I think it's the latest example of some positive communication. I think we all, we look back at this time last year in the January and how many mixed messages there were and how that kind of all combined into the general sense of chaos around the place. The fact that no one quite knew what was going to happen in January. Well, the fact that Bashir was there promising strikers in a window whatever knew they needed to strengthen, and then instead with the sale of Anthony Gordon they only got weaker. So I feel like the club has kind of learned a little bit from that. I thought that Kevin Thelwell got out ahead of the story almost when ahead of the Manchester City game, 27th of December for that night's programme notes. He spoke about just how it's likely to be a quiet window. And I think that just it just took a lot of the sting out the following weeks when nothing was really happening. I think fans had already come to terms with the fact. I think we could all accept that in an ideal world, Everton would have strengthened in January. This is a threadbare squad. And as we saw in January and over Christmas as well, it's susceptible to, it only takes a handful of injuries to keep players and it becomes a very difficult place. But we also have seen, and again, particularly in the build-up to Christmas, that this is a squad that, however much we might worry about its limitations, is a squad that Dyche has turned into a mid-table side. Forget about the points deduction for a second and just focus about on-the-pitch matters. This is a club that have accumulated 29 points. They should be sitting 12th. They should be 9 points clear of the bottom three. Really, if you're on 29 points at this stage of the season, you're probably looking at this and saying 3 more wins and Everton are safe. Pick up a few more draws on the way. So beat Burnley at home in the league, beat Sheffield United at home in the league, find one other win, and they're there. Yeah. And all of a sudden, Everton have got, Thelwell has probably got what he's dreamt of for the 2 years or near 2 years he's been in his post, and he's got a transfer window where he knows the state of play of what he's operating in weeks, if not months beforehand, so that he can then properly plan for it. And as we've said many a time, as I've written many a time, this summer is the best opportunity to almost reshape the squad and essentially undo the remaining damage of the recklessness of the Mashiri years on it and actually build towards a squad that is both competitive and sustainable because of some of the big contracts that will almost certainly fall off the books. And also, obviously, some of the players that they could get in, if they can start having conversations on some of those players who've got expiring contracts and offer them guaranteed Premier League football from Easter onwards. It's a big help. So I think it's good. And I mean, it's another bit of communication. He doesn't say anything that we don't know. And I don't think he says anything that we don't expect him to say either. We know the club are operating within financial constraints. We know the club, in terms of the playing side, is hard done by the way that off the pitch issues have undermined its least. Excuse me. Just way that off the pitch issues have undermined its league standing. And we know that obviously the hope is to build for a better future and a more sustainable future. And he says all those, and he makes some good points. Like I just said, the results show the progress that's being made. The fact that Dyche has been able to do them in the circumstances he's been operating is incredible. And a point I've made a few times, and perhaps unexpectedly, but when we saw injuries and suspensions and absences bite over the main winter months, squad players who we perhaps were writing off, likes of Ben Godfrey, likes of Andre Gomez, even likes of João Virginia, have come in and actually performed quite a high level, which is another reason to have a little bit of confidence going into the second part of the season.
I think as well, when it comes to Kevin Thelwell, obviously it's really tough, isn't it, to analyse and scrutinise kind of his role as director of football, because it has been dominated by off the pitch events that he has no control over ultimately. Kind of walked into a lot of this, a lot of the mess. But he must at the moment take a bit of a huge sense of satisfaction, I would say, because when you think of, okay, it's a bit of a threadbare squad, and we'll get on to injuries and stuff shortly, but it's a squad, like you just said there, can compete comfortably to be mid-table in the Premier League, which is, far cry from when he come in. And also he's now got a manager in place who, okay, people have their own opinions on him, but is a very, comfortably accomplished Premier League manager who knows how to get results and ultimately guided them to safety last season.
Yeah, I think we'll probably come on to this.
I just think, where do you think of, when he come in, and obviously the Lampard stuff, where the jury was very much out on Lampard for a large part of his tenure, and where people believed or not, he was the man to move Everton forwards. There's no such kind of doubt with Sean Dyche, is there? He's the best man for the job at this moment in time.
Absolutely. I don't think anybody could have done a better job than Sean Dyche has over the past 12 months to get that Everton squad that he inherited and to turn it into a side that, as we said, should be mid-table now and on the brink of safety for this season. Yeah, that's absolutely remarkable.
Yeah,
absolutely, especially with all the off-the-pitch issues he's had to deal with. It's an interesting one with Kevin Thelwell in a sense. I think it's still quite hard to actually judge his tenure properly because he's had such limited room within which he can manoeuvre that it's probably an argument to say that he hasn't really been able to do anything. He hasn't been able to spend lots of money, so we haven't been able to judge him on his transfer record as well. Everything has been operating with one hand tied behind his back. Now, it's almost been, you think, from his perspective and probably from Everton's perspective last year, it's just about survival. And the fact is they're still alive and kicking and actually in a place where they're moving forward positively. And as a result of that, I think everybody at the club who has played a role in that deserves a big deal of credit. It'd be interesting to know what some of the conversations that have been had over the recent transfer windows, over every transfer window that he's been in, because you wonder how much of the lack of activity has been done because they just can't do any, and how much of it has been because they've looked at things and assessed things and think they don't need any. And you look at last January, and I know you could argue that you could argue that the gamble not to sign anybody last January paid off because Everton stayed up. But whilst it paid off, I don't think it was a good gamble. I think that was a squad that desperately needed strengthening, and obviously they didn't find a way to strengthen. But we know again that finances were a big issue, and let's be perfectly honest, there was chaos above and below Kevin Thelwell at the time. So I feel like this summer we're probably moving to a point where he will probably have the most freedom that he's had to operate in this role. He'll have, if they get a couple of months where he can plan ahead for the window, with the reduction in wages that will come from some of the playing staff leaving, the likes of, you would assume the likes of Dele Alli and Andre Gomez on the contracts that they're on, and with their injury records, will probably be allowed to go, and even those two by themselves free up a huge amount of wiggle room. This will be Thelwell's first opportunity to be creative, and as a result of that, it'll probably be the first time that we can fairly judge him. But I think that from the limited, stuff that we've been able to see so far, you can't help but say that Everton are in a better position than they were 6 months ago, than they were 12 months ago, than probably than they were 2 years ago when he started. Obviously, I don't think we had any idea of the pain that was to come when Thelwell took that job. I'm sure he didn't either, and I would be very surprised if he knew the full extent of what he was walking into, and I think that's also something that needs to be borne into consideration. I imagine that he's probably come in and been a little bit surprised by some of the problems that he's inherited and were coming down the line, which he may not have known about, having not been at the club previously. So I think that when you look at the last few years of Everton Football Club, there are a lot of questions that you can ask, a lot of fingers that you can point, and a lot of kind of time that you could spend being critical of people and their roles, and how Everton have ended up in the situations that they've ended up in the past 2 years. I don't think that Kevin Thelwell is one of the people that you can point the finger at. I don't, and I think really, as I say, I don't think he's had much freedom to operate, but Everton somehow is still a club that's fighting and still alive, and looks like it might finally be on a position where, if they can get a little bit of success off the pitch with the appeal and with the second profit and sustainability breach, if they can defend themselves against that, or at least move themselves to a scenario where the punishments aren't enough to relegate them, then they're actually in a position where they're building strong foundations to move forward. And I don't think it's unfair to say that Thelwell has played a role in that, and he deserves credit for it.
Well, we move on because obviously there is a big Premier League match on Saturday afternoon, stroke late morning. I think it's safe to say another 12:30 for the Blues. Another early start for yourself and Chris Beasley, both
Absolutely.
be at the Etihad. And let's face it, Joe, it doesn't get much tougher, does it, than Manchester City? Obviously, I haven't got a good point there last season, I think it's safe to say, when Frank Lampard was in charge, obviously New Year's Eve. But this time round, City feel like they're back in that momentum train and charging towards the Premier League title. And Everton are going to be, I think, in for a challenging afternoon, I think is maybe the best way to
it's going to be
describe it.
interesting, isn't it? I've done a fair degree of thinking about this ahead of Man City, and it's strange because I would back this Sean Dyche Everton, or I'd say this Sean Dyche Everton is far stronger than the Frank Lampard Everton that got a point last season. And by virtue of that, you'd think this has also got a chance of getting a positive result at the Etihad. But I wouldn't say I'm nervous about tomorrow because, and I don't believe in free hits or anything like that, but like, you kind of know anything is a bonus, isn't it? I think it will be tough, but I also think that there is a bit of fragility around this Manchester City side defensively. We saw Neil Maupay score against them on Monday. They do tend
I haven't told him missed a great chance as well.
Like they do concede goals, and I feel like where I get a degree of hope from is I think that what this Sean Dyche side is where it's most effective is catching opposition almost when they're cold, catching them. It's very good at being aggressive from the start and taking teams that expect to beat Everton or expect to have an easy game. It's very good at taking them by surprise and getting a start and getting a goal. We saw it, we saw it home and away against Brighton. We saw it away at Brentford for the first win of the season. To a certain extent, we saw it against Aston Villa in the Carabao Cup. How many early goals have we seen this Everton team score? So if this is a Man City side that goes into this game expecting to win, Everton might be able to give it a jolt in the start like they have been able to do in other matches under Sean Dyche. Obviously, what they do, if they don't get an early goal,
or they concede,
or if they get an early goal, it's still going to be a massive ask to get anything from the game. That's where it kind of gives me a little bit of hope, that they might be able to just do something early and just make a game of it. That'd be interesting, like Brentford have done, like so many other clubs have done against Man. Lots of clubs this season have managed to make it a game with Man City. It might be one that they've lost, but they've managed to make a game of it. And Everton did that, only a couple of weeks ago. And that first half was one of the better first halves. It was a brilliant first half from Everton. Like we said, they went 1-0 up. Okay, they didn't win that game. I think the penalty was harsh. I think that when you look at that penalty and you kind of look at the inconsistency for the reasoning why that was given and why one wasn't given against Anthony Robinson the other day against Fulham, I think I have every right to be disappointed. But I do think in that game City were poor. In that second half was probably one of the best performances that I've seen from a collective performance that I've seen from a team at Goodison in quite some time. They were fantastic.
That was when it looked like, wasn't it? They just turned that screw.
That's it, and that's probably
they were looking a little bit back to the best. And
that's probably the big difference compared to. I think the two big differences compared to this time last year from a City perspective is one. I think Everton caught City before they'd done that gear shift where they just go and win endless games
14 on the bounce.
I think they started that now, and the other one is I think that City have some big players with points to prove at the moment because Erling Haaland and Kevin De Bruyne are both coming back from injuries and still trying to kind of refine their form. So it's not a game that either of them will want to, if ever, let pass them by. So obviously that holds a few nerves, and you then add on to the fact that Everton's midfield is still absolutely decimated by injury. There's a lot of reason to be worried about Saturday lunchtime, but hopefully one thing we haven't seen with Sean Dyche is they very rarely get thrashed. They normally find a way of making a game of it. It's been twice this season when they haven't. Wolves away and Villa away, but hopefully Everton can make a fight.
I have to say there, Joe, for I think you've just made a very strong case to be quietly optimistic there going to the Etihad. I think that was a perfectly put little segment that way. People
Yeah.
listen to this now and watching us live on Facebook and YouTube, or maybe we think, you know what, we could maybe get a point tomorrow there. You know, maybe we could. Joe's inspired me there that, you know, what seems an unlikely point could become reality.
Can Dyche invite me in to give the team talk tomorrow?
Well,
I reckon.
Frank Lampard once
I'll be there.
Value, didn't he, to do a team talk before it was at Merseyside derby? So you never know, but. You just touched on it there, the injury situation. It's hard to ignore, isn't it? Because, and I know it's often a bone of contention, I think, isn't it? Safe to say injuries, because there's always, you know, managers who moan about injuries, and, you know, and it's, some people say, well, you know, every team has injuries and every squad has injuries. But when you know, listen to Sean Dyche yesterday, he delivered that injury update on the, you know, what was to be available this weekend. It was, once again, you sat there looking, thinking, oh, Everton are very threadbare, and they really can't afford to get any more injuries or suspensions going into these next. And that's the big thing, isn't it? They, you know, they really can't.
And I think that would colour my approach going into Palace. Sorry, going into the City game with Palace coming up next as well. I'm of the opinion that, you know, it sounds like Amadou Onana's like you know, in contention for the weekend, but it sounds
back on the grass.
Yeah, back on the grass.
Sean.
I mean, I wouldn't play him. I just think that he's a player that could be so important to the rest of Everton's season. After this City game, they've got 8 days until they play Crystal Palace. I mean, that's a huge game. Crystal Palace on a bit of a slide towards Everton and towards the bottom three. Just shorn of their two best players who've got big injuries. Real negative.
A lot of fighting between club supporters and then
real negative mood around the club as well. That has to be seen as a real opportunity to bring another club into Everton's orbit, especially at a time when Luton have hit form. And I still think Everton have got a very good chance of finishing above Luton this season, even if they don't get any points back. I still think come the end of it, I think that there's a good chance of them doing so. But like with many things, there's every chance that things could get worse before they get better, because obviously Everton go to the Etihad and Luton host Sheffield United, which could be an interesting game. I wouldn't put money on Luton winning that, because if you're Sheffield United, you've got to look at that and say, if we're going to have any chance of staying up, that's a game that they've got to go 150% for.
On the back of last weekend's hammer at the hands of
exactly. So you know, I think that there's a danger that obviously Luton move 4 points clear of Everton this weekend, and I think, and they might carry on with that with the momentum that they've got at the moment. So trying to drag clubs into it, you know, like Palace is, and obviously like Forest, is huge. I'd protect Amadou Onana. He's got 8 days to get 100%. If he's 75% now, give him 8 days to get to 100%, and then have him play against Palace and just run the show. You know, for the first time this year, be the third time Everton have played Palace this season. Be the first time he's not having to kind of monitor Eze.
Yeah,
you know, he'll have some freedom to do some damage in that game. So I think that's an opportunity there. I say I'm not going for free hits and write-offs, but bearing in mind we know how difficult City game's going to be, maybe now's not the time to risk him. But you know, obviously aside from that, Abdoulaye Doucouré out, Arnaud Danjuma out as well, Andre Gomez out as well. You know, it's still a square pegs in round holes kind of job for Everton, and you know, I think that really the selection for this game, as much as I'm trying to be positive and saying Everton could get, and as much as I think that Everton needs to do everything they can to avoid getting hammering, because I think I think the mood around Everton is a little bit fragile at the moment. I think a lot of people are just not really sure what to think. Not really sure, you know, that everyone's in limbo waiting to see what the appeal brings. Will they get any points back? They'll then spend another couple of months in limbo trying to wait for the second hearing. Obviously, what happens in the appeal will colour our expectations of the second one. But so you're there, you don't know whether to be positive on that. You know, you're looking at Everton in the relegation zone and thinking, well, I'll probably get 3 points back, so that'll lift them out. Or you're sitting there thinking, I might get no points back and another 3 taken off, and then it becomes very difficult. And I think
you could also say that point be 4 or 5 points behind because results have gone against you.
You know, and I think also that the other thing is, on the pitch, you can very much read the form in 2 different ways. You can say this is a side that's only won 1 in 10. You could say it's a side that's won 5 of its last 14 and kept 8 clean sheets. You know, you could say it's a team that's only won once this year. You could say it's a team that's only lost once this year.
Oh,
you know, there are so many competing ways of trying to address it. Like, I don't know what the listeners and the viewers is. I don't know where their headspace is at. I don't know where your headspace is at, or Ian, He's sat there fuming behind the camera as he tries to work out how Everton are going to get some points from this weekend. But like my mind at the minute is a constant battle of trying to assess and work out quite where Everton are at this present moment in time. And I think the reality is it's impossible for us to reach any conclusion. So
I think the big thing with that, and this is something that I was thinking about actually last Saturday after the draw with Tottenham, and if Everton say hadn't had the 10 points deducted, and where they were, it's all hypothetical at the minute, but you would look at that Tottenham result and think, well, that's a good point. It would, it's a good point to get on the board. You're not lost. But because of the situation Everton find themselves in, like you're saying, you almost think, well, it's a home game. Maybe could have gone.
Yeah, I don't think there is any way to view I don't think there is any other way of viewing the Villa Spurs and Fulham points as very good points. Because I think that whatever the context in which Everton are ultimately going to end up operating in this season, and it's bizarre because we'll only know retrospectively. Like we'll only know in a couple of months' time whether or not it was good for a point or whether they should have been going all out for a win.
Which is the problem, isn't it? That is
exactly. But I think that at least with those games I don't think Everton can have too many regrets over those games, because I think the injury situation that they were dealing with at the time just meant they were almost hamstrung in what they could do. They put the best side out there to achieve the best thing possible, and 3 points from those 3 games was actually very valuable, I think. But yeah, I mean that's obviously going to be the issue going into, because if Everton end up with more points taken off them, then all of a sudden more of these games become must-win games. But you might only find that out similar. I mean, it's trying to go into Crystal Palace. A draw might be a good result because they might end up getting 3 or 4 points back and nothing else taken off them. So we might look back on it and go, well, Palace was a game that was important not to lose, so they didn't get any momentum and leapfrog Everton. Or it could be one that Everton can't afford to not win because, as I say, I think we're all in this mad state of flux and limbo trying to work it out. So if you're, say, Sean Dyche or Kevin Thelwell and you're trying to work out how to approach these games, it must be very, very difficult.
One thing, when we talk about approach, last season when Everton went to the Etihad, Ben Godfrey, of course, was charged with man marking Galen Haaland. Although the Norwegian, of course, did score like he does most weeks. I think we could all agree Godfrey done a pretty good job on, let's just say, disrupting the form routine.
I think he disrupted him. Yeah.
Is that something that you would like? Because obviously we've got to remember now, Ben Godfrey's played himself into some really good form.
Yeah.
He's been really good, and I think one thing we've got to point out is he's responded really well in recent weeks, certainly Fulham and Tottenham.
Yeah, really well,
especially at right back. But now Everton have got options at right back. Would you be against maybe seeing Godfrey go toe-to-toe with Haaland tomorrow again for round 2?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one as to whether or not Dyche might move to a back 5, I suppose. And if he was to do so...
He has done that already this season, of course.
I think if he was to do so, Godfrey in the 3 makes a bit more sense. One, because obviously we saw how well he did against Haaland last season. And although Haaland did score, one, he only scored once, which is an achievement to some extent, or was last season. And 2, I think it's important to say that they riled him up enough to the fact that I really think he should have got sent off in that game. Yeah. I thought it was despicable what he did to Vitaly Mykolenko. I'm not saying that the tackle was necessarily a lead breaker, but because it wasn't. But it was pre-planned. It was premeditated. It was right. Like I had a very good view of it, and you got Mykolenko's quite a slight figure, back turned to Haaland on the touchline. Doesn't expect anything coming his way, getting ready to clear the ball up the line, and you can see Haaland from 10, 15 yards away make up the decision that he's going to go through the back of him. I really thought that was reckless, and he should have gone off for that. And I thought even though he only got a yellow, he thought he should have had a second yellow later on that game for an elbow on Tarkowski. So, Godfrey did as good a job as we could probably hope someone to do on him in that match. I think that I would start Godfrey, and even if it's still 4 at the back, I'd keep him at right back. I probably owe him a bit of an apology. I like Godfrey. I think he can do a job in several places. I must admit that when I found out what the side was pretty early of the Tuesday that Everton played Fulham, I knew what the 11 was, but I didn't know where Godfrey was starting, and my hope was it was going to be right wing back or centre back in a 5 at the back. I was hoping it wouldn't be right back because I just had this the flashbacks to Fulham at home last season when he played right back after Holgate got sent off against Palace and had a really difficult game. So I kind of feared the worst. I feared the worst, and you have to say that Fulham game, the Spurs game's come in and done a very good job at right back, an area that's a bit foreign to him, so he deserves all the credit for that. And I'd start him there again in the back four if that's the way Dyche's going to go again, and also start Young in front of him with Harrison playing off, in the Decore role. As much as anything, one, because it'll give Seamus Coleman a bit more chance to rest up and get match fit again. Like I mentioned, we've got that 8-day gap to Palace after, and I think that this has to be one of the key ambitions for this little period, getting players back to as close to full fitness as they can. And also I think Ashley Young on the right will just give him a little bit of defensive protection as well. And we know that Everton are going to spend a lot of time camped on the edge of their area in this match.
Well, they always say, don't they? I think City make every opposition they play work the hardest. There's some crazy stats about how much running people have to do against Manchester City, and you suspect that tomorrow they will dominate the ball for that.
I'd probably keep it pretty similar, to be perfectly honest, rather than mess around. I just think the kind of the risk and reward. I mean, that's a very Dyche. I just spend too much time talking to him. I think the risk and reward there is. I just don't think the gains are obvious enough from City to be bringing people back when they're still vulnerable from injuries. Like, I think the reality is that Everton could have a full strength side tomorrow that could all play, and every player could play to the very best of their abilities. And City, such as this superpower that they are, could still beat them. The reality is Everton are probably going to be at best 60-70% tomorrow against a City side that's already purring. Again, don't go there expecting to lose, but go there being realistic and pragmatic and going, well, don't do what Hodgson did the other day when, Palace are 3-0 down, the game's already gone, and you bring on your
best player
who's already got fragility due to injury on, and see him. I think almost that's almost a bigger game for Everton this weekend. I think a bigger game for Everton, unless Everton were to get so severely beaten that it really affects the mood, and say Dyche's sides don't tend to have that in them. I actually think the two bigger games for Everton this season are the Palace game and the Luton game, because if Luton don't beat Sheffield United, then that's a real positive for Everton. And I think you could almost do, I think Palace play Chelsea, and you could almost do with Chelsea just scraping a late win, beating Palace but making hard work of it, so everyone thinks that Hodgson, they come out and the players have been playing for Hodgson, they're fighting for him, and he gets a stay of execution, which means he comes down to Goodison and maybe Everton, a team that
very similar when you think about it to last season, wasn't it, when Everton went to the Etihad, when they'd been beaten by Wolves on Box. They were bottom of the league at the time, and everyone was, myself, you and Chris were all there, and we had that feeling of, if this is a stinker of an afternoon, it's almost like we could be writing Frank's goodbye.
Yeah, of course.
How would he, how can he survive a hammer? And they put that performance in, and I think your verdict was, this is a team who was still fighting, still, prepared to go above and beyond and get stuck in for the manager. And there was no sign of anyone kind of, lost faith or, down tools, as we often see. And it almost feels like history is now repeating itself at Crystal Palace, where they're one bad result from Hodgson being sacked, but it's when that bad result will ultimately come.
And Crystal Palace, obviously we'll talk far more about this next week, but Crystal Palace, home and away, have been very big games for Everton over recent seasons. Obviously we had the fantastic comeback night for under Lampard for survival, and then there was a 3-0 win in the October. I mean, it's mad to think it was only last season, because it was October 22, but probably the high point. Probably the high point of Lampard's kind of Everton time, because at that point you remember being at Sandhill Station under the sun after that game, thinking, everybody buzzing and thinking, Everton have just thrashed a mid-table Premier League side, actually playing positive football, and you think maybe things are starting to go somewhere, and they drew at Fulham the next game, and I think that was, other than Man City, that was the last point that Lampard
the start
got.
Of the decline. Just one more before we finish, Joe. One more selection headache, maybe. I think Sean Dyche is facing. Lack of goals is obviously a concern. I think obviously it's something that Everton are not, unbeknown to, is struggles in front of goal. Tomorrow afternoon, do you give Beto a chance to get off the mark and give him a run, or do you stick with Calvert-Lewin?
I stick with Calvert-Lewin, I think. Obviously, it's been a long time since he scored a goal. I think there's an argument to say he's been a little bit hard done by.
He was unlucky last week, I think it's safe to say, with that.
He was unlucky last week. He was unlucky at Tottenham as well, with a goal got disallowed. I do, so trying to work out your thoughts on VAR and everything like that is a nightmare. Like in that case, I thought that it was a foul by Andre Gomez. I just couldn't understand why VAR was getting involved on an incident where the referee and the linesman had a perfect view of it. That felt like
re-reffing the game, isn't it?
Re-reffing the game. You're trying to work out which. Yeah, you're just trying to work out what point someone gets involved and not, and whose view takes precedence. But like had that goal been allowed against Spurs, then it could well have been. The last 6 weeks could have been a very different story. But I think that Calvert-Lewin he's Everton's best striker. I think he still adds a lot of value to the team, even when he's not scoring goals. I think he'll have a difficult job tomorrow because I think that there's every danger that he'll get isolated like he has done without Decore. Everton. I think Jack Harrison has been the best alternative, but by no means a perfect alternative. And I think that's probably the one shame really that Everton weren't quite able to do anything in the January transfer window just to try and give themselves another option in that position. Obviously they didn't, so we've got to move forward without that. But I would do, because I would still, even in the form that he is in, I think that Dominic Calvert-Lewin is a very good Premier League striker. And although he has missed some big chances recently, including the game against Man City when they were 2-1 down, he had that opportunity when the ball came in from the right. I would back him over pretty much anyone else in that side to score the chance. If Everton get one chance tomorrow, then I will, hand on heart, say I want that to fall to Dominic Calvert-Lewin. So he's on that, and there is also the kind of, I know I'm not quite sure what I think about the longer he goes without scoring, the sooner he gets to the next one. I mean, it's a strange, feels like that's offering an excuse to persevere with something that's not necessarily working, but in this case, I think this is something that will ultimately work. And just the sooner that Calvert-Lewin gets scoring again, the sooner that helps Everton, and he isn't going to do that on the bench. So I start Calvert-Lewin.
Okay, well, it's time for predictions.
Yeah.
Given your optimistic view on Everton's trip on this show, I'm expecting you to pick up a positive result.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? You know what?
You can't backtrack. You give a solid reason there as to why we should be optimistic.
I said why. Probably less why Everton should be optimistic, and more why Everton fans shouldn't write off this game necessarily because of it. I'll give you another reason why I think that Everton should be optimistic. Surely, sooner or later the luck's going to turn. They've got to get a penalty or a controversial decision going their way at some point. Why not against City? Surely. I'll keep saying. I've just had a go at Dyche for saying the longer Calvert-Lewin goes without a goal, the sooner the next goal will come. And here's me saying the longer they go without a good decision, the closer it comes. But I just think that we can say what we want about Everton as a football team and as a club over the last few years, and there have been a lot of mistakes made, and Everton have paid very dearly for them. One thing this hasn't been for a long time is a club that's had any luck. It just hasn't had any, on or off the pitch. It just hasn't had any luck. I just keep thinking, surely at some point things are going to turn, even if it's not a sustained turn. Just there's going to be a big moment. Everton have had so many big moments in which the tide has turned against them, or in which they just as every time it looks like they're about to take a step up, they pick themselves up off the floor, someone comes and kick them. There's a 10-point deduction. Just as Everton are there, looking like they're a reasonable side that can get to mid-table, they come and get over 10 points. Just as Everton then go and wipe that out with 4 consecutive wins, there's another charge that comes, and you're just like, surely at some point things have got to change. So, this is basically a long-winded way of me saying Everton are going to win 3-1 with 3 penalties. None of which should have been penalties. 2 of which were outside the area, but the camera's broken. So they can't.
Calvert-Lewin gets back on a goal.
Calvert-Lewin scores a hat-trick. That's it. And they go from there. So maybe. But I mean, on a serious note, I think it's going to be very, very difficult. But what I do think is, and what I hope is that this is still a side under Dyche that can make a fight of it. And I think that we have to view what happens tomorrow in context and say, if Everton come out of that game with a defeat, but a defeat in which they've shown a bit of steel and stubbornness and made it difficult for City, then we have to take the positives from that. So, I'm gonna go 2-1 to Man City, I think. It's not very often I go against Everton on this, but I mean, I think got to be realistic. And if I'm to maintain any credibility, this is probably the easy one to go and say against Everton. But I do think Everton will score, and I think when they score, will probably colour how the match unfolds. But I think probably similar to how we saw at Goodison Park. Yeah, this is a City side with so much firepower, so much ammunition that it's going to be very, very difficult to stop, even if they get an early goal.
I'm going to go 3-1 Man City. I think it'll be 2-1 tight for a long, and I think they'll get hit on the break towards the end.
Do you think the Dyche not being on the touchline will make any difference? You were there at West Ham.
I was, yeah. I was there at West Ham. Well, he was.
It was Ian Woden. Sorry, it was Ian Woden, wasn't it?
Yeah, he was sat not too far from myself and Chris, actually.
I think he was in the press box, wasn't he?
Yeah, so. I mean, he must have had to bring us binoculars because we were quite far away. I think it's the. You don't know, do you? I always think this is one of these things of how much impact does a manager have on the sidelines, how doesn't, you don't know, do you? I think tomorrow will be...
No, but I feel like Dyche probably has more of an impact than a lot of managers because he isn't the silent, brooding, I think watchful, take it all in type, is he? I mean, as we've shown by the 3 yellow cards that he's got, he's very animated, and like, you'll watch him just like I do when we're at the game. He is always barking orders, and there's always all these mad gestures and everything else, isn't there? Like, he's very... I do think a big personality and character.
One person breathing a sigh of relief will be able, but it was on 4th official duty tomorrow.
Oh, yeah.
Because, as we've noticed on many, between Sean Dyche, Ian Woden and Steve Stone, they like to tell the 4th official what they think during matches. So I think whoever's on 4th official duty tomorrow, I should have looked up his name before we come on there, but we'll be breathing a huge sigh of relief that he won't have Sean Dyche down his ear tomorrow, or, contesting every decision that goes for or goes against his side. But yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I think we'll only know tomorrow. If we're being honest, maybe Sean Dyche will look and think, well, if I had to take one on the chin for any game, it's probably just one.
Yeah,
it's probably this one.
As I say, like, I don't think
I don't know how much
he doesn't believe in free hits and things like that. But again, there has to be a degree of pragmatism which says that.
You would also like to think as well, wouldn't you, that a lot of the stuff Everton will be known before they go out to play. They're going to have to keep a certain shape, set up, and you can't see how that would perhaps change throughout the duration of the game, unless maybe with 10 minutes to go for 2-1, they throw on an extra forward or something. But
Woden and Dyche have worked together for a long time, so I mean, there must be a degree of
live together, of course.
Exactly, well, live together in the week now in South Liverpool, don't they? So,
well, yeah.
I mean, just before, one player who won't be involved, and this won't be a surprise, he hasn't been involved in ages, but I keep getting asked about Tyler Onyango, like obviously academy player that was in the matchday squad.
Someone who Duncan Ferguson rates very highly.
Yeah, we had him on loan at Forest Green last season before his hamstring injury ended that. But I keep getting asked about Tyler Onyango. Keep getting asked. He's obviously, he came on against Aston Villa second game of the season. I think the first 5 or 6 games of the season, Premier League and Carabao Cup, he was in the first team squad. And I haven't written anything about this, but he suffered quite a bad groin injury before Christmas, so he's been out for a few months on that. But he's back on the grass, albeit with a medical team, so he's still some way off coming back, but he is increasing his workload. So for anybody that has been wondering about the mystery of Tyler Onyango, it's been an injury, it's been an unfortunate mystery solved, and hopefully he'll be back soon, and we obviously wish him all the best for that as well.
Okay, I think we will leave things there. I think we've chewed the fat enough on all things Everton on this Friday afternoon. Yourself and Bees will obviously be at the Etihad tomorrow. Follow the Echo Live blog and everything else that comes following the game, and we will be back on Monday to dissect and look over Everton's Premier League clash with Manchester City.
And all the controversial VAR calls that went for it.
Well, that would be very nice, wouldn't it? Make a welcome change. But for today, thank you very much for watching, listening. This has been the Royal Blue Podcast.